Something that's been in the works for a while now is helmet cams, and apparently they are here to stay. After specific trials that we saw throughout last season, the FIA believes that the new tech adds value during broadcasts, and fans and viewers, seem to agree. So the use of helmet cams in 2023 and beyond was proposed, and apparently it was unanimously approved to update the 2023 technical regulations. So we will see this as we get going this season. Thoughts on how it seems kind of like a no-brainer to me, Laurence, but what do you make of the helmet cams? You a fan?
Yeah, I think it's one of the coolest things we've seen in terms of a development in the final product of Formula One that comes onto your screen at home. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the coolest things we've seen in ages, perhaps as far back as, the original onboard cameras or some of the changes in views we got from onboard cameras. So it really does give you a different perspective for a number of reasons. One, just because you're that little bit lower in the cockpit, the viewpoint out. And so it's that little bit closer to what a driver has. For years, we've got used to what we call the T-cams, which are the cameras on top of the roll hoop on the top of the car. And you get this kind of view over the front wheels and you see a lot more. But what you always had to remember is that the driver is sat lower than that. And really, they can't see beyond the tops of their two front wheels. And so, yeah, to get an idea of what that's like. And then also sometimes the violence of the movement within the car. And I'm not talking about an accident. I'm just talking in G-forces in corners. But then also last year, one thing that we talked about an awful lot was the porpoising of the cars, the bouncing of the cars up and down due to basically aerodynamic sensitivities and how much you could see that through the helmet cam. Now, the human eyeball was incredible in that it is actually able to adjust for a huge amount of vibrations and weird movements, and your vision stays fairly steady. But the helmet cam technology is kind of moving on as well. So you get an idea of the vibrations and everything, but all those movements you see, even if the driver's eyeballs are able to compensate for some of it, is all in the kind of violence, the sheer forces going through the cars. Yeah, how jarring it is to be a Formula One driver. So I think it's fantastic. And we kind of got really used to seeing it being used in footage last year. We got some glimpses of it, I think, a couple of years ago, and slowly they've been rolling it out. So now to make sure that it's on all drivers' helmets going into the new year is fantastic, because it means every incident, every overtaking maneuver, all of it will be captured. And while you might not see it live through that, they're more likely to use it as a replay. Mm-hmm. That's such a cool perspective, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's really important as well for taking the fan into moments where, for example, when it rains, those T-cams, often it doesn't quite show you just how little visibility there is in the car because of the placement of that. It's actually, a lot of the water being dispersed is being dispersed in a very different way around that camera than it is around the driver. So I think that things like that are super. I mean, I absolutely loved it. I think most people who saw that thought it was incredible. And Laurence is right. So if you see the old 80s footage of Senna and Prost, the cameras are bouncing around, and I mean, it's kind of helped by their, sometimes they're manually changing gears as well in the car, but that bouncing, I mean, some of those onboards in the Senna documentary are just unbelievable. He's going around Monaco and it's the camera's bouncing around. It's fine. And it just adds something visceral to the experience when you're watching it now. And it's, the cameras are fantastic, but it doesn't quite give you that same thrill watching it. So I think that's what the helmet camera does. And I think as well, it just goes to show you how limited that visibility is in the cockpit. You see a lot of this now. I always go back to Lewis v Max at Silverstone. The amount of people I saw on Reddit and Twitter and TikTok and everything after that, kind of almost like it was like the Zapruder film from, the Kennedy assassination, like frame by frame, looking at it like, Verstappen moves a slight bit here and here. But you see it through someone's T-cam, that's one thing. You see it through their visor cam, you realize just how minute these things are and just how quickly they happen. And also, the visibility in those mirrors isn't, it's not great. So it just hammers home again just how amazing it is that Formula One drivers do what they do. And yeah, I mean, last year, I forget the first one we saw last year, but there was one where we were all in the media center and there was sort of people who've been covering it for 20, 30 years who were like, wow, like this is so cool. So I think it has that ability to get people, even who have been watching it for decades, kind of out of their seats and think this is amazing. So from a visual perspective, that's always great.
Yeah, I think for a long time there was a desire to get some kind of helmet cam in there, because in the 90s, lots of cameras started to sprout on the cars in different places. There's one by the front wing and rearward looking ones and things like that. And I think the technology all got a lot more reliable, so they could run it into live transmission. And the Senna documentary is a really good example of some incredible footage. But it wasn't always used in the live stuff. And in fact, I think the makers of the Senna documentary were amazed when they went to Biggin Hill, which is where all the previous reels of film or digitalized video from all those previous years is kept, and they were allowed to go through it all, and they just found this amazing stuff, which is why I think, you know, that documentary is still spectacular even for someone who watched all of those races, you know, because you do get to see something very special. One thing which I really loved, and it wasn't actually to do with the onboard racing, but was for a very brief period they broadcast the drivers' briefings, or at least little snippets from it. And it was when it was pre-Michael Matthews, it was when Charlie Whiting was still the race director, and just seeing above all, I think, Charlie's relationship with the drivers and the level of respect they had with him, and also the jokes that they would occasionally have. So I can't remember exactly when it was, but it must have been, I'm guessing, around maybe 2016, 17-ish. They had these little kind of like snippets of just drivers joking with each other or laughing at each other or asking ridiculous questions to Charlie. And F1 used to put it up on their social media, and a lot of it still floats around now on social media.
There's a gif of Perez, isn't there, that still comes up from that, where
exactly,
I forget what happened. Yeah, I think he and Grosjean had an incident, and Grosjean basically just rats him out at this driver's briefing. He puts his hand up and says, "We're going to talk about what Perez did," and it shows Perez, and he's just like, you know, just like a kid that's just been told off at school. So that was great. And it's a shame they got rid of that, really. But imagine if we'd had that in 2021, just some of the,
God.
you know, some of the stuff. Yeah.
What people want. Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, and also, it sounds like we're trying to sell the Senna movie to people listening, but in that movie, you have incredible stuff in the drivers' briefings where Senna is going at it with the FIA president then, and you know he's got Prost there, and it's got you can see all the, like which drivers are kind of on his side and which aren't. So I think stuff like that. I think that's what Netflix has shown. There's a real market for that kind of thing. It's probably the only thing now that isn't public now in Formula One. If you think about the amount we see, the amount we get access to. And I think there's an element of that, isn't there, that F1 and the teams have probably realized, you know, if you think about Saudi last year is probably a great example where they were having those meetings. Imagine if we'd seen what had been said in those, you know, how much kind of damage control F1 would have had to do. But yeah, I love those as well.
Thanks so much for watching ESPN on YouTube. And for more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for premium content and live streaming, subscribe to ESPN Plus.